Welcome again. This is the Gallo Radio Show on SuperTalk, Mississippi. Thanks for spending some of your Wednesday morning with us. Today is December the 11th. Alongside Lance, I'm Richard, and we are happy to welcome our first guest this morning. Anand Samy joins us. You know Joel quite well. He has been around these parts for a long time, and of course is co-host of America's Roundtable radio program that you hear on SuperTalk Mississippi and lots of other places. Also co-founder of the International Leaders Summit. Joel, it's been too long. Good morning. Thanks for joining us.
A very good morning to you, Richard and Lance. It's great to be back on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Always a pleasure to visit and to get some of your insight. I guess let's start kind of domestically and big picture. There's a lot of talk about hitting the ground running on January 20th. Lance and I were talking about it earlier this morning, and normally you think on Inauguration Day, you have the speech on the steps of the Capitol with tens of thousands of onlookers on the mall, and there's a parade, and then there are the balls that happen on that night where you parade around in a tuxedo from place to place, and everybody wants to celebrate. It sounds like there is a little bit different plan that this Trump administration is actually going to get to work on Inauguration Day, and that they're going to start with the border. What is different as you have watched in the lead up to this Trump presidency as compared to 2016?
Well, indeed, Richard, you've said it well. We do see a very different Trump administration coming in to the White House on January 20th. In fact, as you've mentioned, they're going to be, focused on some of these key initiatives that they promised, and President-elect Donald Trump promised this to the voters. And so what we've already seen is actually key messages being delivered, not just only to leaders in the Senate and the House, that they are serious about accomplishing some of these key promises, implementing them. For example, this past weekend, we had the privilege of hosting Senator Marsha Blackburn, and she serves on the Senate Finance Committee and also other key committees, and they've already begun the work. In fact, she was communicating to us that she has been working with Vivek Ramaswamy of DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, and Elon Musk over the past few months. So it's not that they're just going to be looking at beginning the work on January 20th. The work is already being done and officially will take place on January 20th. And so some of the key priorities that they have communicated, at least from the Trump administration, is to work on tax reform. We know that there's some pushback from the Senate side that they would like to prioritize immigration and energy policy, which President Trump really is focused and committed to doing. But we also, from a policy point of view, believe that the Senate and the House should take a look at all three of them: tax reform, immigration reform, and also energy policy, to get America back on its track again.
Joel, you mentioned DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, that has been very publicly headlined by Vivek Ramaswamy, who you mentioned, and Elon Musk. Elon Musk has got a lot on his plate. I'm curious if Elon is kind of the face of this and will actually have a fairly limited role while Vivek Ramaswamy is kind of doing the daily work. Or do you think that the two of these men are really working side by side, hand in hand, to kind of go through and look for inefficiencies and ways to cut?
Well, as I look at these two billionaires, these individuals who have really achieved the American dream and are now giving back to America, they're not getting paid for being in these positions. They're volunteering their time. And as I look at them, they're multitaskers. So they're taking upon, their own business roles and their day-to-day business activities, but are dedicating significant time to seeing government, actually the reining in of government spending, looking at ways to make government more efficient. And they have a great team that they're putting together. I'm not sure if these names have been disclosed publicly, but of course they're working with members of the House and the Senate. They were on Capitol Hill just last week, actually, meeting with legislators. So from what we gather, that they've been actually doing the due diligence and work over the past few months. And I would say both of them equally are going to be very involved in holding government to account and beginning that important work that American taxpayers are looking at is to making sure that we have an efficient government that is transparent, that is accountable. There's tremendous waste and fraud and also corruption in our government system, and it needs to be cleaned up. And President Trump promised, and we look forward to that happening.
You know, people immediately recoil, Joel, when they hear Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. When they hear those, if there's any suggestion at all that there might be a cut or a change, I mean, people's their guard is raised, the fangs come out, and they're ready to fight. And I'm not suggesting that any of those things should go away, but the idea that you can't look at a system and say, hey, there are ways that this can be run more efficiently, that we can save money in it. Surely in entities as large as those, there are inefficiencies where money can be saved without necessarily cutting benefits to Americans who have paid into the system or desperately need it.
Absolutely, Richard. You've hit a very important point when it comes to government expenses, government spending. And, we can certainly place the Social Security issue on the side for the moment. From my personal perspective, when I look at Medicare or Medicaid and some of these healthcare related issues, as a country that is, certainly the richest country on planet Earth, we certainly have a very high cost when it comes to healthcare. Now, some may attest that to saying, well, it costs a lot to manufacture these drugs or to research them and get them to the marketplace. But what we see is that the healthcare industry, from health insurance companies to pharmaceutical entities to hospitals themselves, we're looking at a system that needs reform. We need to, in fact, look at it from sort of the out-of-box thinking. When we look at pharmaceutical companies in America, why do we have this cartel when countries and citizens of other countries are able to purchase that same medication at a fraction of the price that we are paying for? So there is tremendous opportunity to reform the pharmaceutical industry, meaning, we don't need a cartel. We need to open up this market to companies, say from Europe, from India, that, if, for example, in India, there is a company called Biotech that's done great work in insulin. And they're providing insulin to patients in Mexico, in Canada, in Europe at a fraction of the cost that it costs American patients. So we can do so much in bringing the costs down, certainly promoting competition and removing the cartel at the pharmaceutical level, but also at the healthcare insurance level too.
Visiting with Joel Anand Samy. He is host of America's Roundtable radio program that you can hear right here on SuperTalk Mississippi, co-founder as well of International Leaders Summit. I've got a break coming up in a couple of minutes. We're going to turn to some of the foreign conversation on the other side of this timeout. But Joel, you look at the cabinet nominees for President-elect Trump, and some of them have been a little controversial. We saw Matt Gaetz, and he has since backed out, and Pam Bondi's going to be in that spot running the DOJ, and seems like a great pick. But one of the ones that people have really latched onto is Pete Hegseth as Secretary of Defense. It feels like there's a little bit of a roller coaster, right? There were big cheers, and then the tomatoes started to be thrown from all the different corners about things that have happened in his past and why he's not fit to run this office. But it actually appears, as he is going through some of these meetings with senators, that perhaps he is gaining a little momentum. He certainly has not stopped fighting. What can you tell us about where the Pete Hegseth story is right now in terms of Secretary of Defense?
Yes, indeed, Richard. Pete Hegseth has served our country valiantly. He has been on the field. He has had an opportunity to serve our country and put his life at great risk for the American people. And so he understands the Department of Defense. He understands the importance of leadership. And what Pete has communicated, at least to members of the Senate and also to the public, is that there has been changes that took place under the Biden administration where the Department of Defense went woke. And rather than, seeing a robust military preparedness, we've seen, advertisements promoting drag queens and things of that nature. And we certainly look at the military as being a fighting machine that, first of all, defends our country's interests, defends the nation. And what Pete has communicated that he will certainly fulfill the commitments made by President-elect Donald Trump, and to be able to carry out important reforms within the Department of Defense, which I think is long overdue. And as it comes to Pete and what he is doing, of course, in anyone's past, there are certainly issues of concern and mistakes that have made. But as Pete has communicated, there is a redeeming story about his life. There are certainly challenges, but he's certainly made a turn for the good.
More with Joel and Anand Samy after this on the Gallo Radio Show. Good to be with you on the Gallo Radio Show on this Wednesday morning, the 11th of December. We are 14 days away from Christmas. To Joel and Natasha and all of our friends that are listening on SuperTalk Mississippi, we wish you a Merry Christmas as we get a little bit closer. Joel Anand Samy is my guest, and he is host of America's Roundtable, co-founder of the International Leaders Summit. And Joel, I would like, if we may, to turn our attention to the Middle East. It's complicated, I think. The most recent news is the fall of Assad in Syria to rebel militants over the weekend, and most view this as a good thing. It is tied, though, to this larger. I described it earlier this morning as a spider web. It feels like there's this interconnectivity that exists in the Middle East between Iran and Syria and Israel, and then all of the warring factions that are funded by Iran, and how the destabilization of Syria could affect Iran. And like all of these things are tied together. Can you help us make a little bit of sense of it?
Yes, indeed, Richard. You're so right about it. It is a very complicated story. The history of Syria and the region certainly is very complex. And yes, you're right. Syrians have experienced the brutal 54-year rule of the Assad family. And this past weekend, the group known as Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is designated as a terrorist organization by the United States and the United Kingdom and led by Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani, actually took over Damascus. And we saw the Assad regime fall. So what does it mean for the Middle East and for the region? The Biden administration responded yesterday by stating that it will recognize and support a new Syrian government if it renounces terrorism, destroys the chemical weapon stocks, and protects the rights of women and minorities. The UK has also taken a similar posture. France and Germany already have communicated that they will recognize this newly formed government that is in place at the moment. But it is very complex because ISIS is still in Syria. We know that Iran is still engaged in that part of the world and within Syria because it wants to use the channels of supplying weapons to Hezbollah in Lebanon. And also, we know that Israel certainly struck a great number of targets addressing the concerns of ISIS, but also of these chemical weapons manufacturing sites as well. So Israel moved into the Golan Heights, took over the specific section on the Syrian side of Mount Hermon, which is the buffer zone, to make sure that there would not be any reaction from the Syrian side. So that was a very important posture to take and to be able to safeguard Israel's sovereignty. So we will certainly be patient and seeing what transpires over the next weeks and months to come. But this is all developing as we speak.
It really is remarkable to look and see what the past year and a half has been like for Israel. Now, there are some that would say it's pretty remarkable if you look at the last 50 years or the last 1,500 years of history for Israel, and it's pretty remarkable, and I wouldn't argue that. But specifically this last 18 months, when they have endured the attacks on their soil that they have endured, they have received the blessing of the United States and other allies to say, yes, Israel has the right to defend itself, but they have also chosen to ignore some of the direction from the United States, taking it beyond defending itself, and frankly have put themselves in a more tenable position than they've been in quite some time because of what they have done to Hamas and Hezbollah, and maybe kind of paving the road for some of what has happened in Syria. Where is Israel right now in terms of stability?
In fact, the state of Israel is strong. It is a strong sovereign state and, in fact, benefits from the U.S.-Israel partnership. And America has no better ally than Israel in the Middle East. It's a rule of law nation, a democratic state. And we have a very important partnership with Israel. So Israel, certainly, there was a turning point on October 7, 2023, when Hamas attacked Israel. Some 1,200 individuals were killed. And what has transpired since then, with the support of America and American troops in the region, American naval vessels there, safeguarding Israel's interest and actually intervening when Hamas, when Hezbollah fired rockets, as well as Iran did. And what Israel did, which was amazing indeed, it just took out the leadership of Hezbollah and really dealt a heavy blow to Iran as well. So what we see today is a weakened Iran, a weakened Hezbollah, a weakened Hamas in the region. And one would say that this actually gave the groups in Syria an opportunity to topple the Assad regime, because Iran was weak on one side, Hezbollah was non-existent to aid Assad, and also Russia was certainly kept busy on the Ukrainian border with their certainly challenges out there, as we've seen it over the past few years. So, in fact, Israel is in a much better position now. But yes, at the same time, it is a very volatile spot, and we are certainly concerned about the widening power vacuum within Syria.
See, that's the spider web I was talking about. It's all interconnected, how, one thing leads to another. Maybe, and again, I know this is broad, what effect does the change in leadership in Syria have on Iran? I was reading a story that talked about, this kind of domino of events that has weakened Iran, something that they've built up over the course of decades and spent billions of dollars on in terms of arming these militias, which is probably a really nice way of saying terrorist groups to do their bidding, even though it's not in the state name of Iran. What have the events in Syria done potentially to Iran from a stability standpoint?
Well, what we see on the ground and in talking to Arab leaders and Arab diplomats over the past few weeks, in fact, the Western Front of Iran has been destroyed. So when you think about Hezbollah, when you think about what's going on in Syria today, Iran no longer has a Western Front to be able to actually target Israel. They've lost some strategic outposts there. IDF, over the past several days, has destroyed over 350 Syrian military targets, including Syrian chemical weapons factory. And Iran is certainly on a different footing today because of what happened on November 5, when Americans voted for President Donald Trump. So rather than seeing an appeasing Biden administration, we're beginning to see the beginnings of a peace through strength policy that President Trump had in his first administration, and that we're seeing communicated. In fact, President Trump communicated to Hamas saying, by the time I get into the office on January 20th, I would certainly like to see all the hostages freed. So what do we see? Hamas has now given a list to the Egyptian authorities about the hostages that they would like to release. Iran is certainly in a different position. They have been making statements rather than trying to say that they're the bully of the region. They're somewhat withdrawing some of their statements, and what we will see is a different approach to Iran, because Iran is still a state sponsor of terrorism, and Iran also sees that Russia is not that strong ally that it once had. And I hope and trust that countries like India is going to start decoupling itself from Iran and not to purchase all that oil from Iran, which props up a very dangerous state in the region.
Whew, there's a lot there, and probably should not be surprising to any of us that Assad, when he was exiled, was given asylum by Russia. He ran straight to Moscow when he was pushed from power. Joel, always appreciate your time. What's coming up this weekend on America's Roundtable?
Well, this weekend we're going to be focusing on some of the key things that the Trump administration is hoping to do. The second Trump administration, of course, they're working with members of Senate. They would like to prioritize tax reform, immigration policy, and also the important effort of energy policy. But there's some pushback from Senator Thune and others as well, where they are trying to say, well, let's piecemeal this here. But there's more that can be done, and the American people expect promises delivered, and the Senate needs to get its act together and get the work done.
To me, it's the biggest question going into this new era, where the Republicans have the Senate, the House, popular vote, the White House. Are they going to fight amongst themselves, or are they going to get stuff done? Joel, thank you so much, as always, for your time. Wish you and Natasha and your extended family a Merry Christmas, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Absolutely. Merry Christmas to you, Richard, Lance, and the team at SuperTalk Mississippi Media.
We'll talk to you soon. That's Joel Anand Samy, host of America's Roundtable, co-founder of the International Leaders Summit. We will wrap up the 7 o'clock hour with you next, right here on the Gallo Radio Show on SuperTalk Mississippi.